How does one implement a new game engine feature? That could probably be a documentary. But I thought I'd give a little bit of insight as to what exactly goes into implementing a new feature in a game engine. In my game engine, Hazel. Especially over the last few weeks, I've been working on these little things that you guys who are regular viewers of the channel are probably sick of hearing. Thumbnails for the content browser panel. These things. These little images that everyone takes for granted that let us see visually what asset we're working with and what a file actually is. Something seemingly so simple, something that you probably wouldn't think twice about, is actually moderately complicated to implement in a game engine. But I wanted to take you guys all the way back to the beginning of thumbnails in the content browser. How did that feature begin and why was it not done sooner? That's the other question that people seem to ask. You didn't already have thumbnails in the content browser? Like what? As if features just magically appear at certain times without anyone actually implementing them. It all started about a year or so ago as one of my little experiments. Those of you who know me well know that sometimes I'll just get a random idea. I'll just wake up one morning and I'll be like, you know what? That feature, I want that in Hazel. If the existing work I have is not 100% critical and I can push it aside, I do that and I spend a day or two or so working on that feature for fun. Once upon a time it was path tracing. Once upon a time it was grass rendering. Neither of those features have made it into Hazel officially yet, but they're little experiments that I just decided to do one day. And that's exactly how thumbnails started. It was just a matter of, thumbnails, how hard could they be? Let me just slap this in because I have a few spare hours today. And then, because it's not gonna take just a few hours to do really anything, the real work comes in and I decide that that's it. Like I can't keep working on this, I can't quickly wrap this up and finish this, so I'll just put it onto the back burner. Oh, can I point out quickly, guys, that I am so crazy that this entire thumbnail system that we've been working on for like a month or two has not been committed a single time. It's all local changes. Live dangerously, you know, it's the only way I feel alive, guys, I'm sorry. Which is not good. Like, you guys who are watching my videos should definitely take that from me, that you shouldn't do that, because all it takes is just accidentally reverting something or deleting that folder from your computer or your computer failing or whatever it may be, and that work that you've done is gone forever. Whereas if it's safely pushed to a Git server, just do that, honestly. Now, speaking of features being implemented, let me tell you a quick story from my past working as a game engine software engineer at EA. Our team commonly had to deal with game teams that would use our game engine to actually build the games. And there was one particular team who I won't name the game, but they had some kind of deep fascination with, I guess I could group it into something called meta work. That is work that looks like work, but you're not actually progressing towards your goal of completing the real work. So a great example of that, and one thing that they would do very often, is meetings. They definitely won the award for the most meetings of any team possibly in the entire organization. I mean, it was getting ridiculous because they started having meetings about how they're falling behind the work. So of course, the more you fall behind on completing what you need to do, the more you start having meetings to determine, okay, how can we fix this? Now we, the game engine team, were observing this from somewhat of a distance. And to us, of course, it was very obvious that what they need to do is they need to stop having hours of meetings every week and spend that time instead actually doing the work. Like if they spent that time programming or creating art or whatever it is that they needed to get done, that is a team of like 30 people for, let's say, 5-6 hours a week, extra work. You can get a lot done in that time. And the thing is, communication can happen in a whole wide variety of different ways. It does not have to be an in-person meeting that blocks off hours at a time of everyone's day. It can just be over instant messaging like Discord or Slack. It can be over documentation or like design documents. And as someone who runs a team now that is building a game engine, I find myself gravitating increasingly towards, things like written text or even just like a little video that could be shared with the team instead of having to block out specific meetings. And this kind of gravitation towards writing more has made me kind of think about optimizing that. And that's where Grammarly comes in, the sponsor of this video. Grammarly's entire goal, in a nutshell, is just to simplify the writing process for businesses of all sizes. As someone who is in charge of both the technical and the product direction of the game engine, I am basically like the central hub for all of the communication across the team. And not just the team internally, but the entire public image as well. I've often found myself just wishing that I could not care about formalities or how to phrase sentences more concisely and effectively, but just write whatever comes to mind that communicates the point, and that's kind of it. Grammarly is basically like an AI writing partner that can help you solve all of this. For example, here's a bunch of stuff that I just wrote about Hazel. I can ask Grammarly to improve it or to shorten it or to make it more engaging. And let me tell you, working on a game engine, there are so many different terms to keep track of, and that's where Grammarly's style guide comes in. It's like the perfect thing to make sure that everything is cohesive and consistent across all of your branding. You can use the style guide to build up this entire dictionary of various different definitions and terms that your team uses. This is particularly useful and important for anything that is public facing. It can make sure that your brand, your team delivers everything consistently and cohesively across all of the different authors that might actually write that content. And along that same line, you can also set brand tones to help ensure that your team's communication aligns with your brand. And this is specifically talking about the kind of tone of your writing and how it comes across, whether or not you want it to be formal or informal or extra kind of engaging, or however you want your writing to feel, which is kind of difficult to organize and coordinate across many different team members. Brand tones can really help with that, with practically no friction to the team at all. So try it out and join the 70,000 plus teams that are using Grammarly. Schedule a demo for your team today using my link, which will also be in the description below. Huge thank you to Grammarly for sponsoring this video. So then why? Why is a feature that is seemingly so simple, how does that expand to feel so much work? And furthermore, if we determine that, this much work is required to complete a feature, how do we get around to actually doing that? And that's really kind of like the beginning of a feature and the beginning of this whole life cycle of implementing a feature. So let's talk about the flaws of the asset system. I feel like one of it kind of is clarity, right? I don't like the fact that where the Hazel team, it's not well documented what our asset system, how it actually works, right? I don't think anyone on the team 100% understands everything. And again, going back to the first game we made for a game jam, Forest, back in Ludum Dare 50, there was some confusion over why our asset handle is being lost, what's going on. That was a big part of it. I don't like the fact that it's not we have to clarify how these things work, right? So it definitely needs some documentation, but it also needs a proper rigid, very kind of well-defined design philosophy. Now, determining what drives features and figuring out the triaging of features as well, as I mentioned. A really important slice of that is communication within your team. It's usually a time when you do have a lot of meetings. Not too many meetings though. Whenever you do have an idea for a feature, or whenever you have a specific idea of how the feature should be implemented and all the details surrounding that, it's really important to come to your team and just have a discussion. Because for people who work solo, this can be a little bit difficult to, both execute and achieve, but also imagine maybe even what that's like. But let me tell you, when you are in a group of people and you're all talking, the amount of ideas that come out of that and the things that you never would have even thought of. It's the whole, two heads are better than one situation. What determines whether or not a feature is implemented and when? This is why it's so important to have goals and objectives when you are building any kind of software, really. Thumbnails are a feature that, it's not vital to have thumbnails, and there's always going to be more important work to be done. It's just something that would be nice to have in the editor. So how do we triage that along with the rest of the issues and actually finally decide that no, this has to be done as part of something? In other words, what drives that feature? For the case of thumbnails, it was rather simple if you trace it back from what our grand objective is. Our grand objective for next year, hopefully, is to actually build and ship a commercial game. Two seemingly relevant things need to happen for that. One of them is Hazel needs to be more or less complete to some degree, complete enough for us to take our foot off the accelerator of working on actual Hazel and be able to shift those resources onto working on an actual game. The engine itself also has to be like ready enough to satisfy the requirements of that particular game. If there are features we know we need in the game, it would be better to probably develop them before we do the game, assuming we don't have the resources to develop them both kind of alongside each other. That's the first part. It's a little bit open-ended because what does it mean for like a level of completion and where do thumbnails come into that? So that, I wouldn't say that's 100% relevant, but the point is, do thumbnails fit into that degree of completion that you would like for Hazel? A little bit unclear, but the second part makes it a lot more clear. And the second part is, before we build this game, we need to prototype certain things. Essentially, as part of this pre-production phase for this game that we're building, we want to explore certain art styles, certain gameplay elements, certain tools that we can use to tell stories. We want to make sure that these concepts are properly researched and explored before we commit to going down one particular path, because we may realize that this isn't as effective as it could be. Now, what is prototyping like? Well, for one, you usually have a lot of placeholder assets. It's a really good time for you just to go and download every kind of asset pack you can imagine so that you have like the physical resources to craft your prototype with in the fastest way possible. So you don't want to waste time making assets because they're just placeholder anyway. But since you're still trying to land on a particular feeling or style or test something out, you still need assets that fit well. So if you have this massive asset library, how are you quickly going to determine what you actually want to use? Well, let me tell you, thumbnails help a lot with that. Because if you can just be in Hazel and you can just plop in an asset pack and you can just browse it and see all of the little 3D models, all of the little textures, all of the various environment maps, whatever it may be, if you can just see them visually in that content browser without having to try and load every single one or try and explore them somehow in an external tool, just seeing them all within Hazel would be really, really advantageous, and it would really reduce the friction of the prototyping phase. It would really kind of make that a better experience. And it actually fits in with the way that Hazel handles assets really well. Because since Hazel essentially automatically imports assets, it means that I can just dump all of these asset packs into the assets directory for my project, for my prototyping project, and they will just all appear directly in the content browser panel, ready for me to use inside my scene. These two features together make it really, really fast and easy to prototype in Hazel. And that's what I'm talking about when I mean what drives that particular feature. This is what drove thumbnails. This video is probably going to end up being just a range of different thoughts that are relevant to how features get implemented in Hazel. Now the thing is, development always tends to take longer than you think it will. I made a whole video talking about how everything takes longer than you think it will. Now there's a million things I could say here, but what I'm going to choose to say instead is every time something doesn't go according to plan, try and turn that into an advantage or into a positive thing. If I find the blue material that we just edited, and if I revert that, there you go. Look at that. Actually, it even reloaded it in the editor. So since yeah, you're right actually. Since it had to regenerate the thumbnail, I think that actually caused the whole editor's asset manager to reload the asset, which reloaded it here. But I guess that's kind of nice, you know? Yeah, that's a good point actually, guys. Because look, if I go right click open externally and we get back to here, then I just realized that I think if I edit it here, it's not just going to change the thumbnail, it'll actually change it in the viewport. Now that's pretty dope. Like, I'm not going to lie. This is a completely unintended side effect. A big reason for thumbnails specifically not going to plan, meaning they're not just straightforward to implement from point A to point B, straight line, straight road, no traffic. We get there, everything's done as expected. The reason they weren't quite like that was primarily because of bugs. I know, who would have thought? Software? Bugs. I should probably make a whole video about bugs, but every time there is a bug, I like to think of it as there's two parts to this bug. There's the thing that is physically wrong, and then there's the journey. The journey of discovering what is wrong. The complexity of an issue that you have can certainly make it very difficult to solve that issue. That means that even if you know exactly everything about the bug, you might still struggle to find a solution for it because the issue could be complex, and I mean, theoretically, the issue could be something that humanity has never solved before. However, in my experience, most bugs that we encounter, I would say 80% of the time is trying to figure out exactly what happened. Why did we end up in a state that is incorrect? How did we get here? It's like waking up one day and being like, where am I? How did I get here? So we get thumbnails generating successfully because the generator works fine, right? Then they get cached to disk. Here they are on disk. So if I press this button, it's going to clear the cache. So what it's going to do is it's going to clear the in-memory cache. It's not going to clear the disk cache. Now, what that's going to do is once I clear the in-memory cache by pressing this button, it's going to be like, I don't have these thumbnails in memory. Let me see if I can load them from disk. If it can't load them from disk, then it will generate the thumbnail. That's the fallback. But if it can load them from disk from one of these files, it will. So if I hit this, you can see we get this. Right, which is obviously not the nice thumbnails we just saw, right? But it's going to be bad. Now, obviously, if I then go back here, I don't know which thumbnail this is, but if I delete, like, say, one of these and I try regenerate it, then you can see that now we see the correct one until I try again, because now it's going to load from the file. Clearly, when it's reading from the file, our image is not actually appearing here. So that's what we're trying to diagnose at the moment. And I think one of the things that I discovered maybe, what was it? I think it was just the fact that, oh, this is what it was. This is the worst thing in the world. Okay, so check this out, yeah? So this is what we had. We were doing this basically, I think. Inside our cache, inside our thumbnail cache, we were like trying to load the thumbnail, load it from disk to memory, and we were calling this function, but what we were doing was, image has a constructor. There's actually two constructors apparently. And then they both take in a specification, but then you can see they're taking a buffer. So what we were doing is we were actually like reading the image data buffer from the file and then passing it in like that. And we weren't doing this set data. So it was just this. And I was like, why the heck is it not working? It's weird. It's different. We were seeing different images, which is like, I think a different problem entirely. Like some thumbnails were being, mixed up. Then I'm like, okay, well, let me just like follow this image data buffer and make sure it's actually going in the right place. So I'm like, okay, let me look at image create, and I look at image create, and then to my horror, it's an unused parameter. So we got like image specification, and then we got const void data and buffer that's just not used because the only parameter that's actually passed in is the specification. Issue there. The thumbnails look wrong. What's the fix there? Probably don't stream in invalid data into GPU memory that is that image. That's cool, but why? Why is the data invalid? In that specific case, we can be 95% sure that something is wrong in that road that leads us from point A to point B. Somewhere along the way, something is going wrong because the engine can render images in the UI. I mean, we do that everywhere. So you could say that the bug in a way is well defined because we know what's going wrong. What we don't know is why it's going wrong. Why are we getting to the point where our images do look like that? It could be a number of things. And perhaps more frustratingly, why do I not know why? This is getting pretty deep, but that is exactly my point. This why do I not know why? So my first thought was, what if is the file IO broken, or is there the file format, is it broken? Like is something weird going on with that? So what I had the idea of to do is, what was this in thumbnail generator? Yeah. So I made this little test, and what this test does is this is the function that generates a thumbnail, right? So if I have none, if I just delete these, right, I have no thumbnails, we have to go through and we have to generate a thumbnail. And it does that typically, in the most common case, I think, by getting the appropriate thumbnail generator for the asset type, and then basically using it to like render, right, a thumbnail. And the end result of this function is it returns an image, which is the thumbnail. So it's the job of this is to take in an asset and give me a thumbnail for it, and specifically generate a thumbnail for it. So this isn't gonna read it from disk or from memory or from some cache. This is the thing that creates the thumbnail. So I'm telling it, create me a thumbnail, please, but this is the thumbnail for every single asset. It's just going to be a pink image, right? So I've set the pixels here, the color, to pink. Those pink pixels, presumably, they're gonna get cached to disk, right? Because this is gonna flow through the rest of the system And obviously it doesn't know that I'm now making like pink textures or this is some weird case. It's going to think that's the correct thumbnail to represent that asset, and it's going to take it through like the rest of the code base. And then what do we see? We see pink, right? But was that just the in-memory cache? Like, what about the files on disk? Well, what if I press this button? I'll put a breakpoint here now to make sure this doesn't run again, and I'll run it again. So I've closed the editor, I'm completely running it again. Let's see if we hit that function. No. So this is clearly being loaded from disk. And now if I delete this and I try and run this, then we are going to hit that breakpoint, because obviously now it's going to generate them. Instead of just going through every possible moment where the data might not have loaded correctly, or you didn't create the image in time to render it, or whatever else could have gone wrong there. Instead of simply going through all of those like different possibilities, finding the one that's wrong, fixing it, and then moving on, not looking back at all, spend a little bit of extra time improving your code base and diagnostic tools so that it tells you why that's wrong. You tried to render this thumbnail before the data had finished getting to the GPU. You never properly initialized the image. You never actually uploaded the data to the GPU. You are using an image that is in the wrong format. Whatever the case may be, if your code base is yelling at you that you have done the wrong thing, then that effectively solves 80% of the time that you spend fixing bugs, the why, the finding out why this is wrong. The list goes on, and to take this from a little prototype feature that can just render a thumbnail for a mesh versus something that is production and I can ship it as part of the next Hazel release and have everyone comfortably just having thumbnails for all of their assets in their content browser, those are two very different things. It's like that saying as well, that the last 20% takes 80% of the time. I don't know if those numbers are exactly right, but it's the same idea applies. Hope you enjoyed this little glimpse into what it's like to implement a feature in a game engine. If you have any questions about the process or things that you'd like me to show more of, leave a comment down below, and don't forget to like the video if you did enjoy it. You can also book a demo for your team to try Grammarly by using my link, which will also be in the description below. You can catch me live on Twitch. I'm working a lot on Hazel these days and streaming all of it. And I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.